Hey everybody. First off, sorry for the quality issues. I was having a hard time uploading my presentation, and also I was having some microphone issues with my laptop. I don't know what's going on with it, but as you can see, the title of my presentation, and by the way, my name's Joe. If you haven't figured that out yet, but the title of my presentation is TIF Transparency: Methods Utilized by Arcola, Illinois in Obtaining TIF Legitimacy. So before I go on, I just want to take a little bit of time to explain why this is important to me. My goal, career-wise, is to become a city manager. So with that, I need to kind of become familiar with economic activity inducement tools that are available to municipalities. And TIF is tax increment finance is just one of those options. Even though it's a very good tool and there's a lot of support for it, one of the major concerns is a lack of transparency. So I was a city administration intern for the city of Arcola, and I built a relationship with the administrator there, Bill Wagner, and I had a good experience with them, and I saw that they were able to utilize a lot of these things to ensure transparency within the process and to encourage community involvement. So I wanted to kind of delve into that further, because when I did some initial research into the field of TIF, one of the primary concerns that was talked about was the lack of transparency in the process. So just let me continue. So if we continue, so what is a TIF? That's important. That's important to talk about before we get going any further. TIF is a method. It's commonly arranged by local municipalities and is known as tax increment financing. This method is used by municipalities to assist local pre-existing business in growing or maintaining their business. This tool can also be used to incentivize new business to come to the area and invest within a community. If broken down into steps, it can be really easy to understand, but it seems really intimidating. The first step when attempting to utilize this economic inducement tool is to actually create the TIF district. In certain cases, specific state statutes can mandate that these TIF districts be used in blighted neighborhoods only. After the district has been created, the municipality then analyzes the value of the property within the TIF district using a measurement tool known as EAV, or Equalized Assessed Value. The increased money that results from the enhanced value of the property tax is, in theory, automatically assigned to redevelopment efforts exclusively. Common tactics to use the money would be to cover the cost of building and land acquisition or revitalization of existing structures to ensure their operational nature for the long term. TIFs can present many issues to residents within the TIF district if it is not carried out the right way. And as I just noted earlier, the result most of the time is legitimacy and is a lack of transparency. Why did they get one? Or who knows who to be able to influence the city officials to be able to get some funding from this method? Or just some of the questions that come up whenever we're referring to transparency. So TIF funding can create concerns of fairness, so it naturally will draw enormous levels of public attention. This results in public officials having the incentive to hide areas of the process that the public might not understand on the surface, or even to hide the entire process out of the belief that their actions are for the greater good. Other issues can be the potential fragmentization that TIF can cause, and it pits municipalities against municipalities. And then finally, the original intention of TIF was to address blighted neighborhoods, as I noted earlier. With this, it's kind of gotten away from that. And one of the concerns with TIF also is that it's being used for ventures that are not just targeted to help impoverished neighborhoods. So, for example, it's not being used to, the funds that result from this are not being used to replace a storm cellar. It's being used to buy Whole Foods, was an article I saw recently. So the questions of, is the original intent of TIF being manipulated and not used properly? That's another question. But for my research in particular, This is my question and hypothesis. So, as I noted earlier, I was an intern for Bill Wagner in the city of Arcola for a while, so I built a relationship there. So I decided to utilize that resource and do a case study on the city of Arcola. And what I decided to do is, given the controversial nature of TIFs, I needed to identify how the issue of transparency is addressed by Arcola and ultimately resolved. And it led me to this research question. So the research question that goes, as you can see, is how does the city of Arcola address the issues of transparency with TIF? And then after I considered this more, and based on some of the initial research I did in the literature, I was led to develop this. The city attempts to achieve transparency by increasing community involvement in the TIF process, would be my hypothesis. So to measure this, I was going to, and I did, conduct an interview with the city manager of Arcola, and during the interviews, we would provide documentation of how they did it and how the steps of the member committee worked, how the selection worked, what factors they considered, and things of that nature. So I'll kind of progress with how I conducted the interviews so you can see what I did. So I kind of put a little screenshot of one of the questions and answers from the interview process so you can kind of get a feel for how I did it and how I measured things and how I looked at it. So what I did is I did a qualitative analysis, and I was doing strictly a analysis of what Arcola does in comparison to scholarly literature that already exists on the topic. So I'll kind of read through some of the key questions that I have so you kind of have an idea of where this went and what some of my findings were after speaking with Mr. Wagner, and kind of touch base on some of the literature and how it compared. So for the first question, as you can kind of see, you can see part of it there, is did any situations in particular lead to the city adopting a committee process and confirming or denying TIF requests? I'll just read this whole response by Mr. Wagner so you can get the kind of the full feel. Initially, this is what Mr. Wagner said. Initially, the committee was set up by the city leaders to have a sounding board of business professionals that had experiences that the city council did not have and can review projects through a business filter as opposed to a political filter. As the city of Arcola went forward with and an interest in extending 2 tax districts, it became apparent that the two could not be separated, as other taxing bodies were left out when that growth and taxable increment was going to TIF, and they could not extend their property tax levies to these projects. The affected taxing bodies wanted to exercise more control or influence over how the city of Arcola used TIF funds. This gets into the separation of authority granted to taxing bodies, but that is a whole different argument. In our case, we added a core committee made of local business people and allowed the taxing bodies to submit names of potential representatives from their board that would be appointed by the city as well. This gave the taxing bodies an inside look at these projects and offer an opportunity for them to be critical of projects, but not necessarily the ability to override or to outright veto a project. So what Mr. Wagner was getting at there is that initially, whenever they formed this committee model, they just had business owners coming in and reviewing the project. So essentially, whenever a business would come in and they would apply for these funds, they would have a group of peers, a group of fellow business owners reviewing their committee. However, as it just noted, other taxing bodies had issue with this model. So, for example, another taxing body would be the school district. So what the city did was they ended up letting the school district send a representative so they can have input on this process. However, like Mr. Wagner noted, it wouldn't derail the entire process at all. They would still have an ability to talk and to be able to put their input in, but they wouldn't be able to stop the process if the common consensus was that this was a good project for the city to move forward with. To address a few more topics that Mr. Wagner and I spoke about, I asked him if any situations in particular led the city to adopting a committee process and confirming or denying TIF requests. That was something that I just addressed, I guess. They did. They allowed schools and other municipalities, other taxing bodies to put representatives there due to the confrontation that it caused. By not allowing them to be present or have a voice on these committees. before it went to City Council for a vote. Then I asked him, does the committee help with the transparency of the process? And he felt that it really did, because what it did was it allowed people the opportunity to come in and have a voice. It allowed community members, not even elected officials or representatives, to come in and speak out against a certain project if they want. And the city would do their part, and they would post it around the town, and they would let people know that these meetings were happening. So as the committee process went on, and up until the committee made a decision before they sent it to council, anybody had a chance to come in and speak their piece. So whenever it went to council and it got to council, there was limited opportunities because they could only speak at council meetings. And then once council approved and the process went forward, what it does, it essentially delegitimizes criticism from people in the community, because they had ample opportunity to speak up prior to this becoming a process that they were willing to move forward with. So what it does is it says, if you have, and this is speaking in layman's terms, this is obviously not professional dialect, but the issue is if you have something to say it now before we move forward. And if you don't, then you've lost your chance. And so what it does is, what it says is, you can always speak up. That's not what I'm saying. You can always speak up and speak out against something, but you're going to look less than credible whenever you had an opportunity earlier to speak out against it, whenever it was still in the committee format that was open to anybody and everybody, and you didn't. So that's what the part of the committee is that it wants to get past that process first of the community bickering and involvement, and then move forward with the project. And then afterwards, it gives those people less credibility so they don't cause issues once the project is finally started. And then I kind of continued on this because I wanted to learn more of the committee format and see what the benefits were. And I actually asked him that direct question. If the committee has helped with transparency. And he really felt that it has helped with transparency. He says that people felt more at ease knowing what was going on and having public information posted in the committee, people being out within the community speaking and speaking to people that they know. The word spread faster, and it was a more commonly accepted process afterwards. I asked him if there was any downsides to implementing committee format, and the one thing that he pointed out, and after he said it, it made a lot of sense, was that it slows things down. So he gave me an example, is that if you had an emergency repair that was needed for a downtown building or some key infrastructure project, and a TIF was the only way to respond to it in a timely fashion, the only issue with the committee format is that you're not going to get there through the process that they have in Arcola, because it just takes too long to get through the committee and get through all the steps that they've established. So the thing is that they have to go through another route if they have an emergency situation that comes up. TIF would not be a viable option because of the measures that they've put in place to address transparency issues. So this is kind of a brief look into some of my findings of the interview and some of the scholarly literature that I looked into. But one of the common themes that I noticed that whenever some of the research indicates is that one of the ways to address this is to increase community involvement. And that's exactly what the city of Arcola did. Was that they started this committee format, and the goal of it was to increase community involvement. So it wouldn't be that big of a shock once one of these things passed, because they give everybody in the community a chance to speak up. And it also it gets the information out, because more people are involved in the process, more people have more knowledge of the situation. So to conclude, TIF can be used as a tool to generate incredible wealth for a municipality. However, as indicated in this presentation, it does not come without questions of legitimacy. The City of Arcola took the issue head-on by fully implementing a review committee of community members that are tasked with confirming or denying a proposal prior to it even being considered by the council. This gives citizens plenty of opportunities to voice concerns over a proposal prior to it being implemented. This allows the city to operate on a more flexible basis after confirmation due to the opportunity presented to the citizenry prior. This, in effect, delegitimizes voices of opposition after the fact because they chose not to speak up while I was still in committee. So I hope that you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, please post it in the D2L thread that we have started. I'd be more than happy to answer it. Thank you. Bye.